Maribel Osei had always been the one who answered the phone. She was 36, a claims adjuster for a mid-sized insurance firm in Charlotte, and she had built her entire adult life around a single unspoken rule. If something in the family broke, she was the one who fixed it. Not because anyone had ever asked her outright to take on that role. It had simply accumulated year after year, the way sediment settles at the bottom of a river until one day you look down and realize the riverbed has been reshaped entirely, and nobody remembers what it looked like before. It started small. A late rent payment for her mother when Maribel was 23 and freshly employed, eager to prove she'd made something of the accounting degree nobody in her family had believed would amount to much. Then it was her younger brother Theo's car insurance, then his security deposit on an apartment he lost after 4 months, then bail, actual bail for $100 for a DUI he swore was a misunderstanding. Each time Maribel told herself it was the last time. Each time the next crisis arrived dressed as an emergency too urgent to refuse. There was a particular rhythm to it, one she only recognized in hindsight. Theo would go quiet for a stretch. A month, sometimes 2, long enough that Maribel would let herself believe things had stabilized. Then the phone would ring on a weeknight, his voice pitched somewhere between apology and demand, and within it would always be the same shape. A problem that had already happened, presented to her as a problem she was now responsible for solving, with no real space left in the conversation for her to say no. He was skilled at it in the way people become skilled at things they've practiced since childhood. He'd been doing versions of this since he was 9 and Maribel was 11, since the days when she covered for him with their mother over a broken lamp or a skipped chore, because that was simply what big sisters did, and nobody had ever taught either of them that it was supposed to stop. By the time she turned 34, she had stopped counting the money. What she counted instead, quietly in a notebook she kept in the bottom drawer of her desk at work, were the moments. The birthday dinner Theo missed because he'd had something come up. The Christmas her mother spent the money Maribel had wired for groceries on a slot machine trip to a riverboat casino 2 hours away. The promise, made and broken 3 separate times, that Theo would finally get his daughter Aaliyah into a stable school district instead of switching her every semester whenever he moved in with a new girlfriend or got evicted from wherever he'd been staying. The notebook wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind of thing a person kept to build a case, exactly, though a therapist she'd seen briefly 2 years earlier had gently suggested that was probably part of it. Mostly it was a way of making the invisible visible to herself, because she had noticed that without it, she tended to forgive faster than the facts warranted. She'd flip back through it on hard nights, 3 lines here, a paragraph there, and feel something in her chest go still and clear, the particular clarity of seeing a pattern laid end to end instead of experienced one exhausting incident at a time. Maribel loved her niece with an intensity that surprised her. Aaliyah was 7, sharp as a tack, obsessed with dinosaurs and prone to asking questions so direct they made adults flinch. "Why does Daddy only call you when he needs something?" she'd asked once at age 6, while Maribel braided her hair on the back porch. Maribel hadn't had an answer that felt honest enough to give a 6-year-old, so she'd said something about grown-up things being complicated, and Aaliyah had accepted it the way children accept most inadequate answers from adults, not because it satisfied her, but because she had learned somehow already that pushing further rarely got her anywhere. That was the part that ate at Maribel most. Not what her family had cost her. She could have absorbed the money forever if money were the only currency being spent. It was what the arrangement was teaching Aaliyah. That love looked like extraction. That the responsible person in a family was a resource to be drawn down, not a person with her own life running in parallel to everyone else's. Maribel had started, over the past year, to notice the same patterns forming in Aaliyah that she recognized in herself at that age. The quick apologies for things that weren't her fault, the instinct to smooth things over before an adult's mood turned, the careful, watchful stillness of a child who had learned that the safest place to stand was slightly out of the way. She had tried more than once to raise the pattern directly with her mother, Odessa. The conversations never went anywhere. Odessa had a gift for reframing every boundary Maribel proposed as an accusation, and every accusation as proof that Maribel had grown cold, distant, too citified and too comfortable to remember where she came from. "You weren't always like this," Odessa told her once, meaning it as a rebuke, and Maribel had thought privately that she used to be a person who let herself be quietly consumed and called it love, and if that version of her was gone, she wasn't in a hurry to get her back. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in March, though nothing about that Tuesday looked dramatic from the outside. Maribel was at her desk reviewing a water damage claim when her phone buzzed with a text from Theo. Need you to take Aaliyah for a few weeks. Vegas trip came up, can't say no to this one, it's a work thing. She's already packed. No question mark. Not a request. An announcement. Maribel called him. He didn't pick up. She called again. Straight to voicemail. She texted back. What work thing? Since when do you have a job that sends you to Vegas? No response. 40 minutes later, a second text arrived, not from Theo but from a number she recognized as belonging to Theo's on and off girlfriend, Priya. He asked me to tell you Aaliyah's flight lands at 6:40 tonight. He already bought the ticket. She's flying alone, they said the airline can do that for kids her age with paperwork. He filled it out. Maribel sat very still at her desk for almost a full minute. Her co-worker in the next cubicle glanced over, asked if she was okay. He said she was fine. He was not thinking about being fine. She was thinking about a 7-year-old boarding a plane by herself because her father had decided, without so much as a phone call, that this was simply how things would be, because for 11 years, it always had been. He did not scream. She did not call her mother to vent, which was what she might have done a year earlier, back when she still believed venting to her mother produced anything other than a defense of Theo dressed up as sympathy for Maribel. Instead, she opened her laptop, requested the rest of the day off, and drove to the airport herself to be there when Aaliyah landed, because whatever else was true, a 7-year-old was not going to walk off a jet bridge alone into an empty gate. That part at least was not negotiable. What Theo did not know, what nobody in the family knew because Maribel had stopped narrating her life to people who only used the narration as a map for where to find her, was that 4 months earlier Maribel had quietly restructured almost everything about her situation. She had sold the townhouse in Ballantyne, the one with the guest room that had functionally become Theo's storage unit and occasional crash pad, the one whose address every relative had memorized because it was the address you went to when you needed something. She'd sold it clean, no drama, told her mother only that she was looking into some options, and let the woman assume Maribel was simply thinking about moving, the way people idly think about things without doing them. In reality, the sale had closed in November. Maribel had moved into a 2-bedroom condo across town under a property management company's name rather than her own, paid the extra fee for it without blinking, and told exactly 2 people the new address. Her closest friend, Denise, and her attorney. It was not paranoia. It was architecture. Maribel had learned the hard way that boundaries stated in words evaporated the instant a family member decided they were inconvenient. Boundaries built into the structure of your life. An address nobody had, a bank account nobody could access, a phone number reserved for people who had earned the right to have it. Those held. Words could be argued with. Structures could not. She'd thought a great deal in the months of planning that move, about whether it made her a bad daughter, a bad sister, to build something so deliberately unreachable. Denise, over wine one night, had put it more plainly than Maribel had managed to put it to herself. "You're not hiding from your family," Denise said. "You're just refusing to keep being an unlocked door." Maribel had turned that phrase over for weeks afterward. An unlocked door. That was exactly what she had been. Always open, always available, never once asked whether she wanted to be entered at will. The old townhouse now belonged to a couple named the Whitfields, a pediatric nurse and a mechanical engineer with 2 dogs and a minivan, people Maribel had met exactly once at closing and never spoken to since. If Theo had for some reason tried to send Aaliyah there, the address that still lived in his phone from a decade of habit, he would have delivered his daughter into the arms of complete strangers. The thought made Maribel's stomach turn even as a colder, more clarifying thought sat beside it. He didn't even check. He didn't even think to ask if I still lived there. She met Aaliyah at the gate. The girl came off the jet bridge with a backpack covered in dinosaur patches, a laminated, unaccompanied minor tag around her neck like a leash, and an expression that broke Maribel's heart in a way she hadn't braced for. Not scared exactly, but resigned, the practiced calm of a child who has learned that adults will do unpredictable things and that the safest strategy is not to react too visibly to any of them. "Aunt Mari," Aaliyah said, and for just a second the careful mask slipped and she was 7 years old again, running the last 10 feet and burying her face in Maribel's coat. The gate agent, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, handed over a manila envelope of paperwork and gave Maribel a look that said more than any comment could have. The particular, professional sympathy of someone who had clearly seen this exact scenario before and knew, without being told, that whatever had put this child alone on a plane wasn't a story with a good chapter before it. Long flight for a little one by herself, the woman said, not quite a question. It won't happen again, Maribel told her, and meant it more completely than the woman could have known. In the car, Aaliyah fell asleep within minutes, the particular boneless sleep of a child who has been holding herself together and has finally been given permission to stop. Maribel drove home with one hand on the wheel and the other resting, without really deciding to, on the small duffel bag in the passenger seat. Aaliyah's hastily packed, containing exactly 4 days' worth of clothes for what Theo had called a few weeks. Somewhere around the third exit, Maribel found she was crying quietly, the kind of crying that doesn't require sound, just tears sliding down while the rest of her face stayed composed enough to drive. She did not call Theo that night. She let him call her, which he did 11 times over the following 2 days, his voicemails escalating from breezy, "Hey, just checking, Aaliyah landed okay, oh love you sis," to irritated, "Seriously Mari, you're not answering, that's not cool," to, by the third day, something closer to alarm once he realized his daughter had been collected by an aunt he had assumed wrongly, would simply absorb the arrangement the way she absorbed everything else. Maribel let 2 more days pass before she called him back. When she did not raise her voice. "I have Aaliyah," she said. "She's safe. She's enrolled at the elementary school 2 blocks from where I live starting Monday, because it turns out that's easier for a child than switching schools every time you have somewhere else to be. You can come see her whenever you want, provided you tell me in advance, and it's at a time that works for her schedule, not yours." "Wait, you enrolled her in school? Mari, this is temporary, I'm back in 10 days. You put a 7-year-old on a plane alone with 4 days of clothes and called it a few weeks," Maribel said. "I'm not interested in relitigating what you meant. I'm telling you what's happening now. You can't just, she's my daughter." "She is," Maribel agreed. "Which is why I'd like you to start acting like it. I'm not taking her from you, Theo. I'm telling you that the version of this where you disappear for weeks at a time and I materialize to catch whatever falls is over. If you want her living with you, you build a life that can hold her. Steady address, steady school, someone who shows up. I'll help you get there if you want the help. But I'm done being the invisible net that makes it possible for you to never build one." There was a long silence on the line. Then, in a voice that had lost all its performative ease, "Where do you even live now?" Priya said the taxi people at your old place had no idea what she was talking about. Maribel closed her eyes. So he had tried the old address. Not personally, he'd had Priya try to book something, some airport pickup arrangement that had apparently fallen through before it started, which was the only reason this story didn't end with Aaliyah standing on the Whitfields' porch at 9 at night instead of walking off a jet bridge into her aunt's arms. The realization sat in Maribel's chest like a stone. He had not even known where she lived. 11 years of being the family's safety net, and her own brother could not have told a stranger her address. "I moved," she said simply. "Months ago. I didn't tell people who use addresses as an entry point rather than a place to visit." "That's insane, Mari, we're family." "We are," she said. "And family to me means Aaliyah gets an aunt who shows up and gets a father who eventually learns to. It doesn't mean I owe anyone unlimited, unquestioned access to my life just because we share a last name. I've been paying that particular tax for 11 years. I'm done." The fallout, when it came, arrived exactly the way Maribel had expected. Not as a single confrontation but as a slow-motion campaign, waged mostly through their mother Odessa, who called Maribel 3 times a day for a week with a rotating cast of arguments. "You're punishing him for being a father who trusts you. You're going to traumatize that girl, ripping her out of her school like that. Family doesn't keep secrets from family. What kind of person doesn't tell her own mother where she lives? You've always thought you were better than us and now you're proving it." Maribel let most of these calls go to voicemail too, not out of cruelty but because she had learned, slowly and expensively, that engaging with an argument built on a false premise only legitimized the premise. She was not punishing Theo. She was declining, for the first time in over a decade, to make his choices consequence-free. Aaliyah was not being ripped from a stable school. She had never had one. And the secrecy Odessa found so offensive was, Maribel had come to understand, simply what it looked like when a person who had spent her whole life being findable finally became difficult to find. Her Aunt Rosalind, Odessa's older sister, weighed in too, unprompted, at a family gathering Maribel hadn't attended but heard about secondhand from a cousin who still spoke to her. Rosalind had apparently told the room that some people get a little bit of money and forget where they come from, a sentiment that made Maribel laugh out loud alone in her kitchen when she heard it, not because it didn't sting a little, but because of how thoroughly it missed the point. She hadn't forgotten where she came from. She remembered it in granular, unglamorous detail. The year the power got shut off twice, the second-hand shoes, the particular hunger of being a responsible child in a house that treated responsibility as a resource to be mined rather than a trait to be nurtured. She hadn't grown cold. She had simply stopped being willing to let that history be used as leverage against her now. She did answer once, when Odessa called from a different number. Theo's, it turned out, borrowed for the occasion, and put Aaliyah on the phone without warning, clearly hoping the sound of her granddaughter's voice would soften Maribel into folding. Aunt Mari. Aaliyah's small voice, cautious. Grandma says I have to ask you to let me go stay with Daddy again, 'cause he misses me. Maribel kept her voice light and even, the way she always did around Aaliyah, refusing to let the girl carry the temperature of the adults around her. Do you want to go stay with Daddy, baby? Pause. I want Daddy to come here, Aaliyah said finally. I like my new school. I made a friend named Priya. Not the other Priya, a different one, and we're doing a project about Triceratops. Then that's what's going to happen, Maribel told her. Daddy's welcome here anytime. You don't have to go anywhere you don't want to go. She heard Odessa's voice in the background, sharp, and then the line went dead. Maribel sat with the phone in her hand for a long moment, feeling something settle in her chest that she didn't have a word for yet. Not triumph, exactly. Something quieter. The feeling of a structure finally bearing the weight it was built for. Denise, when Maribel recounted the call later that week over coffee, asked the question Maribel had been avoiding asking herself. Are you scared this costs you your mother? Long term, I mean. Not the yelling. The actual relationship. Maribel thought about it honestly before answering. I used to be, she said. I think I'm more scared of the version where I fold and Aaliyah grows up learning the same lesson I did. That love is something you earn by disappearing into what other people need. I'd rather lose the easy version of my mother than hand my niece that inheritance. Theo did come, eventually, 3 weeks later, sober-faced in a way Maribel hadn't seen from him in years, sitting across from her at the small kitchen table in the condo he hadn't known existed until a month before. He'd lost the job he'd claimed sent him to Vegas. There had been no job, of course, only a friend's bachelor party he hadn't wanted to admit to skipping his daughter for, which was, in its own way, almost more damning than a lie about work would have been. I don't know how to do this, he admitted, turning a mug of coffee he wasn't drinking in slow circles on the table. The stable life thing. Every time I try, something falls apart and it's just easier to call you. It's always been easier to call you. I know, Maribel said. That's exactly the problem. It was easy for both of us for a long time. Easy for you because I never said no. Easy for me because saying yes felt like being a good sister, a good aunt, a good daughter. We built something that worked fine right up until it put a 7-year-old on a plane by herself. Theo flinched at that, visibly, and Maribel did not soften it. She had softened things for him his entire life and watched the softening get mistaken for permission. I'll help you, she said. Genuinely. I'll help you find a job, help you budget, help you figure out childcare during the hours you're working so Aaliyah has real stability instead of whatever room happens to be available that week. But I'm not going to be the option you reach for when things get hard. I'm going to be the person who helps you build something that doesn't require an option like that in the first place. Theo asked quietly whether she'd ever forgive him. Maribel considered the question longer than he probably expected. I already have mostly, she said. Forgiveness was never the hard part for me. The hard part was making sure forgiveness didn't turn back into permission. Those are two different things and I spent a long time treating them like they were the same one. Took most of a year. Theo did not become a different person overnight. There were setbacks, a job he lost after 2 months. A night he showed up at Maribel's door at 11 p.m. wanting to talk that she gently but firmly redirected to the following morning, because 11 p.m. crises were exactly the pattern she was no longer willing to underwrite. There was a bad stretch in the summer when he missed 2 consecutive weekends with Aaliyah and offered an explanation so thin Maribel didn't bother arguing with it, simply noted it in the notebook that still lived in her desk drawer, and told Aaliyah, honestly but gently, that her father had let her down again, and that being let down by someone didn't mean anything was wrong with her. But slowly, incrementally, something did shift. He kept a job at a distribution warehouse for 6 months, then 8, then a year. He found a one-bedroom apartment in a decent complex with a month-to-month lease that eventually became a full year's lease. He started showing up to Aaliyah's school events. Not all of them, not perfectly, but more than he ever had, and crucially, when he said he'd be somewhere, he increasingly was. He started a small, awkward ritual of Sunday dinners at his apartment, cooking badly, Aaliyah narrating dinosaur facts through the whole meal while he pretended, not entirely convincingly, to already know them. Odessa never fully came around. She continued for years to characterize Maribel's boundary as an act of coldness, a betrayal of some unwritten family constitution that held the responsible child hostage to the irresponsible ones indefinitely. There were holidays Maribel spent alone by choice, unwilling to sit at a table where her decisions would be relitigated over dessert. And there were others where a fragile, careful peace held for exactly as long as nobody mentioned the townhouse, or the taxi, or the months Odessa still referred to pointedly as when you disappeared. Maribel stopped waiting for her mother's approval sometime during that first year, not with bitterness but with something closer to relief. The specific relief of finally setting down a weight she had been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was optional. What she did not stop doing was showing up for Aaliyah. Every school play, every dinosaur-themed birthday, every awkward parent-teacher conference that Theo occasionally missed and Maribel quietly attended in his place. Not as a substitute parent trying to replace him but as the aunt who had promised, that first night at the airport, that Aaliyah would never again wonder if anyone was actually coming. She learned the names of Aaliyah's teachers, her best friends, the specific dinosaur that had, by third grade, dethroned the Triceratops as her favorite, a Therizinosaurus, a fact Aaliyah delivered with the solemnity of a state secret. She built, deliberately and without fanfare, exactly the kind of steady, boring, reliable presence she had never quite had growing up. She opened an account eventually that nobody else in the family knew about. A modest fund added to steadily meant for Aaliyah's education, held in a trust structured so that no one but Aaliyah at 18 could touch it. Not Theo. Not Odessa. Not even Maribel herself once the paperwork was signed. It wasn't a large gesture, not the kind of thing that made for a dramatic reveal at a family dinner. It was closer to the opposite. Quiet, structural, built to outlast any argument anyone might make about who deserved access to it and why. She funded it the same unglamorous way she'd funded everything else in her life. A set percentage of every paycheck, automated, unremarkable, the financial equivalent of a habit so ingrained it no longer required willpower. Aaliyah found out about it years later, at 17, when the trust's paperwork required her signature for the first time. She'd sat across from Maribel at that same small kitchen table, older now, dinosaur patches long since traded for a battered laptop covered in college application stickers, and asked quietly why Maribel had never mentioned it. "Because I didn't do it to be thanked," Maribel said. "I did it because somebody in this family needed to build something nobody could take apart. I wanted you to have one thing in your life that was just yours. No strings, no arguments, no relative who thinks they get a vote in how it's used. Just yours." Aaliyah didn't say anything for a while. Then she reached across the table and took her aunt's hand, the way she used to when she was small and the world felt too big and unpredictable to face alone. "You were the net," she said. "The whole time. Not the one everyone kept throwing me into. The one that actually caught me." Maribel thought about the townhouse she'd sold without telling anyone, the address she'd guarded like a locked door, the phone calls she'd let go to voicemail for months at a stretch while her family accused her of every kind of cruelty except the one that was true, that she had simply finally stopped being available on demand to people who had never once asked whether the demand was fair. It had cost her things. Her mother's easy approval. The particular, uncomplicated warmth of a family that didn't examine its own habits too closely. A version of herself who believed that being needed and being loved were the same thing, and that giving up the first would mean losing the second. What she'd gained back, she thought, watching Aaliyah's face, steady now, unguarded, no longer the careful mask of a child bracing for adults to disappear, was worth every bit of it. Some nets are built to catch whatever falls indiscriminately forever, until they fray under the weight of it. Others are built with an edge, a shape, a boundary that decides what it will hold and what it won't. Maribel had spent 11 years being the first kind. It had taken one bad flight, one 7-year-old alone at a gate, and one quiet, unglamorous decision to become the second. And that, in the end, had made all the difference not just for her, but for the small, resilient girl who'd needed, more than anything, someone whose love came with a floor she could actually stand on. The fund sat untouched for another year, until Aaliyah opened her acceptance letter to a state university with a strong earth sciences program. Dinosaurs still, in the end, just grown up into paleontology. And for the first time in longer than either of them could say, the whole family gathered at Maribel's condo to celebrate something that had nothing to do with an emergency at all. Theo brought a cake he'd baked himself badly, and everyone ate it anyway, laughing at the collapsed middle layer. And for once nobody mentioned the taxi or the townhouse, or any of the old ledger of grievances that had once seemed too heavy to ever set down. Odessa, older and quieter now, hugged Maribel a beat longer than usual at the door and said nothing, which from her was its own kind of apology, the closest thing to one Maribel had ever received, and she found enough. Maribel didn't need the apology. She'd stopped needing it somewhere in the last decade, right around the time she'd learned that the strongest thing she could do for the people she loved wasn't to keep absorbing every consequence life handed them, but to hand some of those consequences back, carefully, without cruelty, but without exception either, and trust that the people worth keeping in her life would rise to meet them. Most of them eventually had. And on the nights when Maribel found herself thinking back to that Tuesday in March, the phone buzzing on her desk, the announcement dressed up as a request, the cold clarity of understanding exactly what was being asked of her and choosing for the first time not to give it, she didn't feel the old flare of anger anymore. She felt something closer to gratitude, strange as that seemed. That single ordinary terrible Tuesday had forced her hand in a way that years of quiet resentment never could have. It had shown her, in the starkest terms possible, exactly what her old life would keep costing if she let it, and exactly what a different one might look like if she didn't. She kept the notebook still in the same bottom drawer, though she opened it less often now. The later pages were different from the early ones. Fewer grievances, more small, unremarkable good things. Theo picked Aaliyah up on time 3 weeks running. Mom asked about my job instead of my calendar. Aaliyah got an A on the Triceratops project and wants to add a Therizinosaurus unit next. It wasn't a record of vindication anymore. It had become, almost without her noticing the shift, something closer to a record of a family slowly, imperfectly, learning to hold its own weight. Not because Maribel had forced them to, exactly, but because she had finally stopped making it possible for them not to. There was one more conversation that stayed with her, longer than almost any other from that whole stretch of years. Not with Theo and not with Odessa, but with Aaliyah the summer before she left for college. They were sitting on the small balcony of the condo, the one that had replaced the townhouse's back porch where Maribel used to braid her hair, and Aaliyah had asked out of nowhere whether Maribel regretted any of it. The moving. The silence. The year her grandmother barely spoke to her. Maribel had thought about lying, softening it the way she used to soften things for Theo, and then decided against it, because Aaliyah was 17 now and had earned better than a soft answer. I regret how long it took me to do it, she said. Not that I did it. I spent over a decade thinking that being needed constantly was the same thing as being valued, and it took nearly losing something precious to figure out those aren't the same thing at all. If I regret anything, it's the years before that Tuesday, not the years after. Aaliyah nodded slowly, looking out at the parking lot below with the particular unhurried focus she'd inherited, Maribel sometimes thought, from nobody else in the family but herself. I used to think you just liked rules, she said. Like the school stuff, the schedule stuff. I didn't get it was, she paused, searching for the word, protection. Not for you. For me. Both probably, Maribel admitted. I don't think you can build something that protects someone else without it ending up protecting you too. That's sort of the whole trick of it. She thought sometimes about the version of herself who might have answered that text differently, who might have driven to the old townhouse instead of the airport, who might have called the Whitfields in a panic and asked them, mortified, to let a stranger's child wait on their porch until someone came. That version of events had never happened because months earlier, in a decision nobody at the time had understood or approved of, she had quietly rebuilt the foundation of her own life so that it could no longer be used against her without her consent. It hadn't felt in November like the kind of thing that would matter. It had felt like paperwork, like closing costs and change of address forms and the particular administrative tedium of moving. But foundations rarely announce their importance in the moment you lay them. They simply wait, patient and unglamorous, for the day the wait finally comes, and on the day it did, hers held.